Did you know that Australian households now carry more debt than almost any other country on Earth, with debt levels reaching over 185% of household income? Or that millions of families are just one interest rate hike away from financial disaster? These aren't wild predictions, they're current facts, quietly building towards something much bigger. Behind the sunny headlines of recovery and resilience, a dangerous storm is brewing. Property prices are sky high, wages are shrinking, and the cost of living has exploded. But that's just the surface. Beneath it all, 10 critical warning signs are flashing red, and yet almost no one is talking about them. In this video, we're breaking down the real reasons why Australia could be heading toward its worst economic crisis in decades, and why it may start in 2026. The signs are already here, but will you recognize them in time? Let's find out. Number 1. Skyrocketing household debt. Australia is sitting on a ticking time bomb: household debt. Right now, Australians owe more than $2.5 trillion in personal debt, and most of it is tied up in mortgages. According to data from the Reserve Bank of Australia, the household debt-to-income ratio has soared to over 185%, making it one of the highest in the developed world. This means for every dollar Australians earn, they owe nearly double. That level of personal debt is dangerous because it makes the entire economy incredibly fragile, especially when interest rates rise, which they already have. Why is this such a big deal? Because the Australian economy depends heavily on consumer spending. When most of a family's income goes toward paying off loans, there's less money to spend on goods, services, or investing in the future. That drags down business profits, slows job growth, and eventually leads to higher unemployment. Add in rising inflation and unpredictable interest rates, and it's easy to see how stretched households could be one step away from default. Financial pressure isn't just growing, it's intensifying, and it's hitting middle-class Australians the hardest. This level of debt creates a domino effect. One late mortgage payment turns into two, and then entire neighborhoods feel the strain. Banks tighten lending, housing markets cool, and consumer confidence collapses. And once that downward spiral begins, it's incredibly hard to stop. That's why many economists warn that household debt isn't just a personal issue, it's a national threat. If 2026 brings even a modest economic shock, like a global slowdown, a jump in interest rates, or a rise in unemployment, Australia could find itself facing a full-blown financial crisis triggered by its own unsustainable debt load. Number 2. Real estate bubble. Australia's real estate market has long been a national obsession, but now it's starting to look like a national liability. Despite a series of interest rate hikes from the Reserve Bank, property prices in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne have remained shockingly high, with average home prices still hovering above $1 million. For many young Australians, home ownership has become a fantasy, not a goal. But what's even more worrying is that experts are warning this isn't just a market correction waiting to happen, it's a bubble on the verge of bursting. Why? Because these prices have no connection to wage growth or rental returns. In fact, many investors are buying properties at a loss, simply banking on the hope that values will keep rising. But bubbles don't last forever. When interest rates rise and demand cools, as we're seeing now, the cracks begin to show. Already, some analysts estimate that homes are overvalued by 30 to 50%. If a mass sell-off begins, or if mortgage holders start defaulting under pressure, it could trigger a housing market collapse, dragging the broader economy down with it. The ripple effects would be devastating. A crash would wipe out trillions in household wealth, hit banks with a wave of bad loans, and potentially cause a recession more severe than the 2008 global financial crisis, especially since so many Australians have tied their financial futures to property. Superannuation funds, investment portfolios, and even state governments, which rely on property taxes, would all take a hit. The real estate boom gave many Australians a false sense of security,
But if this bubble bursts in 2026, it could become one of the primary triggers for the country's worst economic downturn in modern history.
Number 3. Wage stagnation. While the cost of living in Australia continues to soar, wages have barely moved. Over the past decade, and especially since the pandemic, real wage growth has stalled, leaving many Australians struggling to keep up with rising expenses. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, real wages have actually declined by 4 to 6% since 2020, once inflation is taken into account. That means Australians are working just as hard, if not harder, but can afford less than they could a few years ago. This silent crisis is putting massive pressure on households, eroding savings, and forcing more people to rely on credit just to get by. This wage stagnation doesn't just affect individuals, it's a drag on the entire economy. When people earn more, they spend more. That spending keeps businesses alive, fuels job creation, and drives economic growth. But when wages are flat and everything from groceries to rent is getting more expensive, people start cutting back. Small businesses feel the pain first, followed by larger sectors that depend on consumer confidence. The result is a slowing economy, rising financial stress, and an increased risk of social instability as everyday Australians grow frustrated with a system that seems to leave them behind. In the long term, wage stagnation also discourages ambition. Young people lose motivation to upskill or enter the workforce when the rewards no longer outweigh the costs. Skilled workers may leave the country for better opportunities elsewhere, causing a brain drain that weakens Australia's future competitiveness. With inflation still elevated and living costs unlikely to fall anytime soon, wage stagnation could become one of the most damaging and deeply rooted causes of the coming crisis. Unless this changes soon, it will only deepen the economic divide and set the stage for larger shocks in 2026 and beyond. Number 4. Over-reliance on China. Australia's economic engine has long been powered by its exports to China, particularly in sectors like iron ore, coal, natural gas, and education. For years, this relationship brought in billions and kept the economy growing, even when other nations faltered. But now, this dependence is turning into a serious economic vulnerability. With China's own economy slowing and diplomatic tensions between the two countries continuing to rise, Australia finds itself dangerously exposed. If China reduces its demand or redirects trade relationships, the ripple effects could be devastating. We've already seen warning signs. China has previously targeted Australian goods with tariffs and import bans, impacting wine, barley, seafood, and timber. Imagine if similar restrictions were placed on Australia's most valuable exports. Mining towns could face sudden unemployment spikes, universities could lose international students, and government revenues would take a hit. What's even more concerning is that Australia has failed to diversify its export markets fast enough, meaning there's no safety net if China pulls back further. An economic downturn in China, combined with trade restrictions or geopolitical flare-ups, could hit Australia harder than many expect. It's like leaning on one leg and hoping it never falters. Without a serious strategy to reduce this over-reliance, by building new trade partnerships, investing in local industries, and strengthening economic self-reliance, Australia will remain at the mercy of a foreign power's internal decisions. This isn't just bad economics, it's a national security risk. In 2026, if China's slowdown continues or tensions escalate further, Australia could find itself in the middle of an economic freefall, triggered by a relationship it once thought was unshakable. The lesson is clear. What once looked like strength is now a potential breaking point. Number 5. Rising interest rates. Interest rates in Australia have climbed rapidly in recent years, and the effects are now being felt across the entire economy. In an effort to tame inflation, the Reserve Bank of Australia has pushed the cash rate from record lows to levels not seen in over a decade. For the average mortgage holder, this means monthly repayments have surged by 30 to 50% in just a short span of time. Households that were once financially comfortable are now under serious strain, with many dipping into savings or taking on more debt just to stay afloat.
For a country already burdened with massive household debt, this is a dangerous mix. Higher interest rates don't just hurt homeowners, they also make it more expensive for businesses to borrow and grow, which slows down hiring, expansion, and investment. Consumer spending, which drives much of Australia's GDP, also falls as more money is diverted to debt payments. First homebuyers are being pushed out of the market, construction activity is slowing, and confidence in the financial system is dropping. What was once intended as a short-term fix for inflation is now turning into a long-term drag on growth. The most alarming part? Rates may continue rising in 2026, especially if global inflationary pressures persist or oil prices surge again. Australia's economy is being squeezed from both sides, rising costs on one hand and tighter financial conditions on the other. If the Reserve Bank miscalculates and pushes too far, the result could be a credit crunch, widespread mortgage defaults, and a potential collapse in consumer demand. In that scenario, rising interest rates won't just be a response to inflation, they'll become one of the main causes of Australia's next major economic crisis. The risk is real, and the window for prevention is closing fast. Before we dive into the next reason, quick question. Which of these warning signs do you think is the most dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And if you're finding this valuable, hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but it helps us keep creating videos like this with the depth and research they deserve.
Number 6. Collapse in consumer confidence. Consumer confidence in Australia has dropped to some of its lowest levels since the global financial crisis, and that's a red flag the size of the entire economy. According to Westpac's Consumer Sentiment Index, Australians are feeling deeply pessimistic about their financial future, the job market, and the broader direction of the economy. This matters because consumer confidence isn't just a mood, it's a key driver of spending, investment, and growth. When people feel uncertain or fearful, they stop spending, delay big purchases, and hold off on investing. That hesitation creates a chain reaction that can freeze economic momentum. Businesses respond to weak consumer confidence by cutting costs, slashing marketing budgets, shelving expansion plans, and sometimes even laying off staff. This creates a negative feedback loop. Less spending leads to fewer jobs, and fewer jobs further destroy confidence. It's a dangerous cycle that can push a country into a recession even if other indicators appear stable. What makes this even worse in Australia's case is the combination of high debt, stagnant wages, and rising living costs. People are not just worried, they're financially strained, and that fear is being reflected in every dollar they don't spend. The collapse in confidence is also affecting key sectors like retail, hospitality, and tourism, industries that rely heavily on discretionary spending. If sentiment continues to deteriorate in 2026, especially alongside global uncertainty, Australia could face a sharp and painful contraction in demand. The danger lies in how quickly a lack of confidence can tip an economy from slowdown to crisis, especially when it's already under pressure. In short, when the average Australian loses faith in the future, the economy doesn't just pause, it starts to unravel. And right now, that unraveling may already be underway, hidden behind falling sales and empty storefronts.
Number 7. Underemployment and job instability. On the surface, Australia's job market looks solid, with unemployment rates hovering around historic lows. But beneath those numbers lies a growing problem: underemployment and job instability. More and more Australians are stuck in casual, part-time, or gig economy jobs that don't offer enough hours, stability, or income to keep up with the rising cost of living. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, underemployment is quietly increasing, with millions of workers unable to secure the full-time roles they need. This hidden crisis is creating a generation of workers who are employed in name only, but financially insecure in reality. These unstable jobs also come with limited protections, no paid leave, minimal job security, and few benefits. That means even a small disruption, like illness or a missed shift, can throw a family's finances into chaos. It also makes long-term planning nearly impossible. How can someone invest in property, start a business, or save for retirement when they don't even know what their next paycheck will look like? This widespread uncertainty is eroding both economic confidence and personal well-being, and it's leaving a growing portion of the population vulnerable to even minor economic shocks. In the bigger picture, an economy that relies too heavily on insecure employment becomes structurally weak. Consumer spending drops, social inequality widens, and productivity suffers as people cycle through jobs that don't match their skills or aspirations. If Australia enters a downturn in 2026, it's these workers, already living on the edge, who will be hit first and hardest. And with so many in this precarious position, their struggles could become the spark that ignites a broader economic collapse. Job numbers alone don't tell the full story anymore. The real danger lies in the kind of jobs Australians have and how fragile those jobs have become.
Number 8. Government debt blowout. Australia's national debt is approaching $1 trillion, and the consequences of this growing burden are beginning to show. While government spending surged during the pandemic to support businesses and households, that emergency response has now turned into a long-term financial strain. With an aging population, rising healthcare costs, and increased demand for public services, the federal budget is under intense pressure. Interest payments alone are consuming billions each year, money that could have been used for infrastructure, education, or climate resilience. The country is slowly but surely entering a phase where debt repayments start crowding out essential investments. What makes this even more dangerous is that much of the spending was not paired with long-term revenue growth. Corporate tax cuts, underperforming resource royalties, and overestimated growth projections have left the government with limited options to balance the books. And with inflation and interest rates rising globally, borrowing is becoming more expensive. If revenue doesn't catch up, and fast, Australia could be forced into making tough fiscal decisions, cutting public services, raising taxes, or both. These decisions could hit everyday Australians hard, deepening economic inequality and further reducing consumer confidence. In the lead-up to 2026, this growing debt load could act as a slow-burning fuse. A global economic shock, a drop in export revenue, or a natural disaster could suddenly make Australia's financial position untenable. Investors may lose confidence, borrowing costs could spike, and the government might struggle to respond effectively in a crisis. Unlike past decades, there's now less fiscal room to move. The truth is, Australia has been living beyond its means for years, and unless bold, structural reforms are made soon, this debt blowout could become one of the defining triggers of the country's next major economic meltdown. Number 9. Climate disasters and insurance crisis. Australia is facing a new kind of economic threat, one that doesn't start in boardrooms or banks, but in the sky and the soil. Over the past few years, the country has been repeatedly battered by floods, bushfires, droughts, and cyclones, with each event costing billions in damages. In 2022 alone, the East Coast floods became the most expensive natural disaster in Australian history, exceeding $5 billion in insured losses. And it's not slowing down. Climate change is making these events more frequent, more intense, and more unpredictable, putting entire regions at constant risk of devastation. But beyond the physical destruction, there's a growing insurance crisis. As climate disasters increase, insurance premiums are skyrocketing or disappearing altogether. More than 1 in 25 Australian homes are now considered uninsurable due to high climate risk. This means families and businesses are left completely exposed. Without coverage, a single disaster can wipe out life savings, destroy local economies, and force entire communities to relocate. The long-term impact? A slow decline of regional economies, rising homelessness, and increased strain on government emergency funds that are already stretched thin. This isn't just an environmental issue, it's becoming a major financial risk. Property values in high-risk areas are starting to fall. Banks are reassessing their lending criteria,
and local councils are struggling to maintain infrastructure damaged by repeated disasters. If 2026 brings another round of climate shocks, and the data suggests it will, Australia's economy could face massive disruption. Recovery costs will rise, productivity will fall, and insurance markets may collapse in vulnerable zones. What used to be rare, once-in-a-generation disasters are now shaping the economic landscape, and unless urgent action is taken, climate events may soon become one of the leading causes of financial crisis in the country.
Number 10. Global recession pressure. Australia may be an island, but its economy is anything but isolated. In today's hyper-connected world, a downturn in one major region can send shockwaves across the globe. And right now, those tremors are getting louder. The United States is battling persistent inflation, Europe is facing an energy and cost of living crisis, and China's growth is slowing sharply. Together, these regions make up the bulk of global demand. If they slip into recession or even stagnation, Australia's export-heavy economy could be dragged down with them, regardless of how strong its domestic fundamentals appear. This is especially risky because Australia relies heavily on selling raw materials like iron ore, coal, and gas, much of it to countries that are now scaling back industrial production. If global construction slows, if manufacturing dips, or if energy prices tumble, Australian export revenues could collapse overnight. That would hit not only national income, but also state budgets, mining jobs, and the broader investment landscape. Super funds would shrink, the stock market would fall, and everyday Australians could watch their financial security evaporate without warning. What makes the threat even more concerning is that Australia may enter this storm already weakened. With high debt, housing market fragility, and stagnant wages, that means there will be far less room to respond with stimulus or support if a global recession hits. In short, Australia could become a casualty of international turbulence, even if it isn't the one causing it. History has shown that global downturns don't need permission. They arrive fast, ripple wide, and punish those who are unprepared. If the global economy turns south in 2026, it may be the final push that transforms all of Australia's current vulnerabilities into a full-blown economic crisis. The warning signs are there. The question is, will we listen?
Australia's economy isn't heading toward a single-point failure. It's being squeezed from 10 different directions at once. From soaring household debt and unaffordable housing to wage stagnation, climate risks, and an over-reliance on a slowing China, the warning signs aren't just there, they're screaming for attention. These aren't random problems, they're deeply connected, forming a fragile system that could unravel quickly if the pressure continues to build. The year 2026 may not bring a sudden crash, but it's becoming increasingly clear that without serious reform and preparation, a major economic reckoning is not just possible, it's likely. The question now is, will Australia face this head-on or sleepwalk into a crisis? What makes this moment so dangerous is the illusion of stability. On paper, some numbers still look fine, but underneath, confidence is collapsing. Risk is rising, and the future is increasingly uncertain. Governments, institutions, and individuals must all act now to shore up resilience, because once the tipping point is passed, it's very hard to come back. History shows that the biggest crashes rarely come from one cause. They come from a storm of factors, just like what we're seeing now. So if you've made it this far, ask yourself, which of these 10 warning signs worries you the most? Or is there another threat we haven't covered that you believe is even bigger? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below, and let's start a real conversation about Australia's economic future. If you found this video helpful, please consider supporting our channel. We put a huge amount of time and research into making content like this easy to understand and worth your time. All it takes is one click to subscribe, and it means the world to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.